Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Transport for the South East annual conference. I'm afraid, just like a real conference, it takes a while for everybody to file into the room, so I'm very sorry for the short delay while we get underway. Just while all that's happening, and we get underway with the exciting programme lined up with you for the day, we have a couple of polls that we'd like you to take part in that will help inform some of the decisions that get made going forward. So hopefully you can now see those on your screen, and I'd really appreciate your voting. How long do you think it will take for public transport usage to return to pre-COVID-19 levels? I can see we've still got people coming into the room. So welcome to our newcomers. I'd be very grateful, just while we wait for everybody to come in, as we've got a lot of people joining us this morning, if you would take part in our polling. We have a second poll up now, and I'd be grateful if you could vote on that. And here's an interesting one. Do you think the UK will achieve its net zero target by 2015? Vote now, please. Welcome to everybody who is still joining us and coming into the room. Thank you all for taking part in our polls. It's lovely to see so many of you here today. And I will now hand over to our event host for the day, Mike Pearse.
Well, a very good morning, everybody, and welcome to the annual conference for Transport for the South East. Obviously, we'd love to be face-to-face, but of course, currently we can't. So I think Zoom, as in so much of our lives, is saving the day. So what's ahead over the next 90 minutes? Well, we'll get an update on Transport for the South East, and I'm pleased to confirm our keynote speaker will be Baroness Vere, the Transport Minister. And with so much going on in government at the moment, I think it'll be really interesting to hear her comments and what she has to tell us. We've also allowed some time today to talk about transport and land use planning, and I think that's really important as well. We're hearing that there'll be 350,000 new homes needed every year moving forward. And how often when we get new developments do we hear they've built the houses, but they haven't put the infrastructure in, there's no public transport. And I think, if we don't provide public transport and cycling and walking and all the other things that we need, how are we ever going to get people out of their cars, particularly at a time when we've got 1 in 10 bus routes that have been cut. And also, of course, the new white paper for planning, I think also interesting as well. I'm sure we'll touch on that as the day goes on. Now, I want to hear from you as much as possible. That's why we've got some question and answer sessions lined up. So do take part, and I'll tell you how to do that in just a moment. But also, I just say is that if you are taking part, want to get to as many people of you as possible. So just try and be concise. Okay, so now before we start, as ever, the housekeeping rules. I don't think Zoom has any fire drills virtually planned, so we don't have to worry about that. And I think you know where your facilities are. Okay then, so if you would like to ask a question, there are 2 ways you can do it. You can either use the Q&A function, which you'll find on your taskbar at the bottom of your screen, or you can raise your virtual hand. And I do encourage you to do that. I will try and get round to as many of you as possible. But also, please remember to unmute yourself if you are taking part, and I do cross to you. Please don't use the chat button as it's for general messages. Also, as you've seen, there will be polls during the session today, so please do take part. It'll be really interesting to see what the results are. And any questions I'm able to answer today, we'll circulate the answers around shortly. Well, I've long believed that the South East does need a voice for transport. I've been covering transport in the South East as a journalist for best part of 30 years now. And you go to London and you see they've got TfL. Yes, it's different, but it is a voice. And now we have Transport for the North. So I think it's really good to see that Transport for the South East is actually making some progress. So enough from me for now. Let's get started. And to open proceedings, let's hear from the Chair of Transport for the South East, Cllr Keith Glazier. Keith.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our conference. Just a quick reminder, I'm sure you won't need it, but Transport for the South East is the subnational transport body for the South East of England. Our partnership brings together 16 local transport authorities, 5 local enterprise partnerships, 46 district and borough authorities, and a range of wider stakeholders from the worlds of transport, business, and the environment. And together, our goal is to deliver a high quality, sustainable and integrated transport system that for all of us supports and increased productivity to grow the South East and the UK economy, and compete in the global marketplace. Improves safety, quality of life, and access to opportunities for all. Protects and enhances the South East's unique natural and historic environment, and of course enables our region to hit the net zero carbon emissions target that's been set. By speaking with one voice, our region's transport priorities, we are able to make a stronger case to government for the investment in the South East. The South East is already a powerful motor for the national prosperity, adding more than 200 billion to the UK economy, more than any region outside of the capital. It's a huge economy in its own right, home to 7.5 million people and more than 300,000 businesses, from FTSE 100 giants to nimble and innovative startups. It boasts world-leading universities and research institutes, dynamic towns and cities, beautiful coasts and countryside, and is our nation's key international gateway of people and goods. When the South East prospers, so does the whole of the UK. Success that has come at a cost. Growing congestion and historic lack of investment means that our transport network is underinvested and under intense strain. New housing is being hampered across our region by inadequate road and rail links. Deprived coastal communities are cut off from the growth and opportunity by poor transport connectivity. Levelling up is needed here, just like other regions in the country. This is why we need to talk about better integrated transport and land use planning, which is the theme of today's conference. At the same time, we need to ensure that the big increase in walking and cycling in the recent months are locked in, and other short-term behavioural changes, in particular the huge reduction in public transport use, don't translate into the unsustainable longer-term trends. All of this on the back of COVID, and I'm sure that these complex issues can't be tackled in isolation. That is why Transport for the South East partnership of public, private sector is so vital for our region's future prosperity. And I really hope that all of you join in and enjoy today's conference. Thank you.
Keith, thank you very much indeed. Now, after our next speaker, we will be having our first Q&A session. So again, please raise your virtual hand, ask a question using the Q&A. We've also got, I just see there, another poll. So please do take part in those polls. Really good and interactive as well, which we want to have as much as we can during today's session. Now, our next speaker is Rupert Clubb, who's the lead officer for Transport for the South East. Many thanks, Rupert, for joining us. You're going to tell us about the South East Strategic Investment Plan. Rupert.
Thank you, Mike, and welcome to our conference today. As Mike said, I'm Rupert Clubb. I'm the Chief Officer Lead for Transport for the South East. And I'm going to take you through a series of slides this morning that explains our journey towards a strategic investment plan. So I'm going to share my screen. If you just bear with me 1 second, whilst I find the right PowerPoint. I'm going to talk to you about how we get towards a strategic investment plan for the South East. So a series of slides. I'm going to talk to you initially about our transport strategy and what we've done, a bit of background on what we've done to publish that, linking in then to the area studies, which are the next stage of the development of our strategy, which starts to describe some of the interventions that we think are necessary to meet those strategic objectives. I'm going to touch briefly on decarbonisation. I think that is a significant issue for all of the subnational transport bodies over the next few years, and then touch upon some of our thinking around COVID-19. So if I start off and just remind you of our mission, and I suppose the simplest way to describe it, when you look at those 3 circles on the right-hand side, that Venn diagram, our mission is to hit that sweet spot in the middle, where you've got a balance between economic activity, the environment and society. And that, I think, gives us the opportunity to become more productive, more competitive, improves the quality of life, enhances that natural and built environment, but importantly, facilitates that economic growth. And that sweet spot is what our strategy intends to deliver over the next 30 years. England is now covered by 7 subnational transport bodies. The South East is an important component. It brings together 7.5 million people. And as Keith mentioned at the start of his presentation, the 16 local transport authorities, 5 local enterprise partnerships, 46 boroughs and districts. And what we have is full coverage across England. And in effect, the transport strategies that those subnational transport bodies produce give full coverage across England. And I suppose, for all intents and purposes, give us an English transport strategy. So if we remind ourselves about our area, it's pretty significant in terms of the environmental quality, 2 national parks, a wealth of areas of outstanding natural beauty, but it's also the international gateway for the UK, with ports at Dover, Portsmouth, Southampton, significant movements through both Gatwick, and although only just outside of our geography, Heathrow Airport and the surface transport implications of Heathrow are significant. So our area, as I mentioned, covers the South East, 7.5 million people, and is the international gateway to not just the South East, but the rest of the country. So if you are manufacturing goods, either in the Midlands or North East, North West, there is a high likelihood that you will move goods out of these South East ports. And so the South East plays an integral role in levelling up the economy, improving productivity elsewhere across England. And I think the ability that we have to speak with a single voice on the transport interventions, the strategic direction for those key transport corridors is fundamental. So if I take you on to our transport strategy, which we recently published, it is, I think, an exciting vision for what 2050 might hold. It sets out our ambition to move away from what we'd call predict and provide to a plan and provide situation where we plan more for people and places. So we don't plan for vehicles. We look at the places in which people live and how we enhance those. And if one thing COVID has taught us over the last 6 months or so, it is the value that people put on the place that they live, the importance of access to green spaces, and the importance of that sort of place agenda. So our strategy sets out that ambition, and it describes a future scenario, a route to growth, a sustainable route to growth, and recognises that we can't just have growth at any cost, but that transport is a major facilitator to that sustainable growth route. What is key, though, is, of course, it's all well having a transport strategy which sets out fine words and an ambition for the next 30 years. What is crucial and what, frankly, people want to know is, well, what does that mean in terms of the interventions that we'll see? So there's a number of strands here. The first 2 things I would touch upon is the importance of future mobility, and to say that we are working on a future mobility strategy in parallel with some of our area studies. And the other aspect, touching upon the international gateway element, is freight, logistics and international gateways. So understanding the importance of freight. Absolutely delighted to hear that at Southampton, I think it was yesterday, an announcement to improve freight connectivity in and out of that area. And then in parallel to that, we're running 5 area studies. And these area studies take that strategic ambition and start to look at, well, how do you achieve that strategic ambition? And what does that mean for those corridors that we identified within the study? When all that comes together, it provides you a strategic investment plan. And that strategic investment plan sets out the ambition, sets out the specific interventions, sets out the price tag to facilitate that economic growth. And, as I mentioned earlier on, that has to have regard to both the environment and social issues that face us today. I think it would be remiss of me not to mention some transport and land use planning, and certainly from a Transport for the South East perspective, we have long said that there is a bit of a disconnect between transport and land use planning, but we have this golden opportunity, don't we, through the Planning for the Future white paper that was launched in August. I am sure many of you are beavering away, preparing your responses for the closing date of the 29th of October. But I think what is significant for us, and when you start to look at, and I do hope you can see these slides, that as you look at our employment growth forecasts across the South East, and you try to match that up with housing growth forecasts, the two don't meet, they don't line up. And if I just move back a slide, so employment growth forecast again, you can see that, and then move to housing growth forecast. They're very different. And from a sustainable planning perspective, putting housing in communities that are already facing pressures and burdens around their infrastructure is incredibly challenging. And we think the opportunity to join up transport planning and land use planning presents a fantastic chance to ensure that we genuinely are driving sustainable communities. With those two slides I've showed you, if housing growth forecast goes in the places that's being suggested, without regard to transport connectivity, then you're placing burdens on the communities that you're looking to increase. And so we think the planning white paper presents an opportunity to be able to consider strategically the cross-border, cross-boundary issues that affect sustainable communities development. It is far greater than just housing. It links into employment space, to health, to education, and to green spaces. So I mentioned the area studies, and I'll just give you a bit of a whistle-stop tour. You'll be familiar, I am sure, with the major corridors and economic hubs and international gateways across the region. And what we are doing is splitting up this area into 5 area studies: an inner orbital, outer orbital, south central, southeast, and southwest radial. And my next few slides will just give you a very brief overview of what those look like. So the outer orbital effectively covers the South Coast Corridor and recognises that it's so important those area studies have a relationship with other area studies and with adjacent subnational transport bodies. Because as we know, transport doesn't respect an administrative boundary. And this South Coast Corridor is a fantastic example of how a transport corridor crosses many local authority areas. And these orbital studies start to give us the opportunity to define some of the interventions along those key transport corridors. Again, if I move on and show you the inner orbital, and you can see how they blend, so they meet. So from the M25 down to Gatwick, and then that will meet with the outer orbital study that comes up from the South Coast up towards Gatwick. And then again, to give you an example, the southwest radial area, picking up the Isle of Wight, Hampshire, into the Berkshire, Thames Valley area, but also the relationships into what we call the Western Gateway area and transport for the economic heartland as well. South Central, pretty much what it says on the tin, so that Brighton Main Line corridor up to Gatwick is the sort of spine to it, and then fans out to pick up both the southeast here and the southwest that I showed you previously. I said I would touch on carbon impact assessment, and it's just to give you in a slide a sense of what we're doing. So, we are setting out a quantitative approach to assessing carbon. So really understanding effectively the carbon budget, the emissions baseline, and recognising that all of our constituent authorities have themselves said that they want to achieve a net zero position. And we have, within the strategy, said that we want to do that by 2050 at the latest. Now, I know what some might say. Some might say we need to act now and do this quicker. But we think, given the interventions that are needed for transport, that it is a sensible target to have a net zero position by 2050. And I should stress 2050 at the latest. But this approach allows us to understand what our baseline is and how we might then use that baseline to identify the contributions to carbon, or rather the contributions to that net zero position that specific interventions will bring about as part of those area studies. And of course, we await the DfT's plan on transport decarbonisation, because of course we know that transport as an overall greenhouse gas emitter is perhaps the largest sector, and in real terms certainly has been growing as other industries, power generation, get cleaner and greener. And the other area I would just touch on before I finish up, Mike, is trying to understand the impact of COVID-19. And this is incredibly challenging. I think we're all sort of grappling with this, and how might the impacts that we've been feeling over the last 6 months continue? What trends will we see go forward into the future? What are the impacts on the continued lockdown, certainly on the economy and on transport? And just looking at some of the rail passenger journeys, going from something like 430 odd million down to less than 50 million, effectively at the drop of a hat, presents some real economic challenges in relation to rail. And we can see that the policy and behavioural responses, as I say here, they're effectively incremental and tactical in a way as the situation continues to evolve. So what we're doing is using a scenario-based approach to try and understand the impacts on both employment, business activity, and then subsequently travel patterns. And during the work that we're undertaking within the area studies, we have that opportunity to feed in that evidence and research to help us understand what are the best interventions as we move forward through our area studies that continue to facilitate that economic recovery. So, Mike, I'll stop there. Thank you very much. Apologies for the slides. I do hope that you managed to see them as we went through, and I will stop sharing now.
Okay, and I'm sure we can share the slides around to people who want them. So thank you very much indeed. We are coming to a Q&A now. Just a reminder, put your hand up, ask a question on the Q&A function. And I think if we do see any more polls cropping up, then actually do take part in those. It's great to hear your views on that. Okay, so let's go for contribution then and the question. Roger Gale.
Okay.
Hi, Roger.
You apparently can't see me, but can you hear me? Oh, you can see me.
Yes, Roger. How are you doing?
I'm all right. I'm just trying to work out how to get a camera on. Okay, I can't
just
get.
on the screen on the left. You should see a camera.
Yeah, that's what I thought, but all I've got is a microphone. No worry. Let's do it in sound. I won't delay everybody. Various things. Thanks, Rupert. One of the elephants in the room that I'm afraid is right up at the front of this. I know it's a webinar looking to the future, but in the very short-term future, we have major problems running ahead. Still can't find a camera. Have major problems running ahead with freight, which you mentioned briefly, and Dover. It is abundantly plain that the Department for Transport, but more particularly the Cabinet Office, are way behind in their preparations. That the Kent Access Pass is untried and untested. That the European document that is required, and I can't remember the name of it, EUAT or something. There is a UK one which people were being encouraged to obtain, which actually won't be valid after the 31st of December. They need an EU document. There's a whole series of problems piling up due to be released on the 31st of December. What, if anything, Transport Southeast can do about that, Keith, I don't know. But we're talking very hard and very fast, obviously, to ministers. But anything you can do to throw your weight in behind that would be extremely helpful, because we are facing chaos, I think, in Kent. I appreciate that you cover a much wider area than Kent, but it's going to have a knock-on effect across the piece. Interested to note the comments concerning the Southeast Radial. We have to press the case again for the completion of Brenley Corner and the A2. And as that discussion and that particular piece of work goes forward, I hope that, I'm sure it will be included. One thing that you didn't touch on, but is another very serious issue, I'm afraid, is the impact that the curtailment of services on Eurostar is likely to have on HS1. Eurostar is now down to 3 trains a day, none of which are stopping in Kent. So Ebbsfleet and Ashford have effectively been written off, and there's a real danger, we think, that Eurostar might decide to consolidate on London and not have any stopping services in Kent at all, which, given the growth of Ebbsfleet, would be madness and bad. But again, in the short term, HS1 is reliant upon trains carried for its revenue. So given that Eurostar is cutting its services back, that means less revenue for HS1, which means potentially higher increases in the domestic services in order to pay for the shortfall in the revenue. Well, I don't know whether Southeast Transport have taken that on board, but it's another potentially very serious issue. And the final thing I would just mention, in view of the pretty little map of the Southeast and the Southeast Radial area, is that you show airports. You've missed Manston off it. Please put Manston on. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much indeed, Roger. Rupert, any response to that?
I suppose I fully understand the implications for Kent as we lead up to the end of the transition period. Certainly time is short, and the government, the DfT, I know, are working hard with officers in Kent to ensure that it runs as smoothly as possible. And I think the key is, I suppose it's the message that Michael Gove put out to hauliers, the importance of them being ready, having all the paperwork and necessary aspects in place. I think it's not just Kent, of course. Whilst the short straits is the most significant in terms of numbers or movements, there are implications for both Portsmouth and potentially smaller ports as well, such as Newhaven. And I do know that local authority colleagues across the region, through their local resilience forums, will be working to ensure the smoothest possible transition. I know your comments about Brenley Corner, and we have recognised as part of the RIS2 prioritisation that the importance of that intervention, and we identified that as a key component for improvement. And on Eurostar, again, those points, I suppose, are echoed across the rail industry in terms of downturn in revenues. I think when you start to look at some of the COVID implications, what is key over the next few months is going to be, the improvement in relation to treatments, and one would hope, the possibility of a vaccine in the future. And some of the scenario work that we've been doing looks at the sort of therapeutic element, as well as the possibility of vaccination and what that might do to transport demand. And certainly, vaccination, hopefully when it comes, will give people confidence to get back on the rail system again, and actually the wider passenger transport or public transport modes. I realise that's a lot of uncertainty and lots of ifs and buts. I don't think there is anything that Transport for the South East can do in the short term. I think the DfT's, in a wider rail aspect, moving away from franchises as we know them to contract arrangement, starts to demonstrates to me an understanding of the issues that they face. There's no easy solution, I have to say. I think, Mike, have I picked up all those questions, or I missed it?
No, I think that's fine. Keith, any words from you? And also, I think, moving forward, people's commuting habits are likely to change forever, aren't they? I mean, they're going back to 5 days a week is probably never going to happen. So it's going to be quite a radical change moving forward.
Mike, thank you, and thank you, Roger. Just to give assurance that Roger Goff, the leader of Kent, and I are in constant contact with regards to the issues of our borders and across, of course, the whole of the TFSE region. And on Eurostar, yes, we share the concerns, and I had a meeting with all of the MPs in East Sussex last week, and of course, it could be another opportunity for us to join with Kent and get HS1 into Hastings, which is another form of revenue for HS1. So all of the points you raised are on our radar, but as Rupert says, the ability for us as a subnational transport board really is to support and help where we can. As an overall strategy, I don't think the time we've got left, we're going to make a lot of difference, but we will continue to add our weight to whatever's going.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Let's just go through a couple of questions that have come in then. This is an interesting one. The economy of the South East and London is so interlinked. Why not transport and London? Transport for London and the South East. How about that, Keith?
Shall I go first?
Yeah.
I mean, one of the points that that we set up Transport the South East is that actually the government, in their wisdom, for whatever reason, always quotes London and the South East. And when you look at the investment that's gone on in London, and then compare with that with what's gone in in the Transport for the South East region, you can see it's way outweighed and out of balance. So clearly, we think that the Transport for the South East region needs the investment that it should be due, and we were determined to make the case for that. Of course, we have TfL sitting on our board. It's really important that the whole of the subnational transport boards interlink, because actually most routes don't stop at the borders, and so we do have to have a good working relationship. But actually, I think it is time that the government and actually investors and private companies need to have a reassurance that there is a voice for the South East, and that's us.
Rupert, briefly.
I think Keith highlighted it well. I mean, London linked in with the South East skews any debate around investment figures. And when you look at investment in transport infrastructure in the South East, it is not as great as areas of the Midlands or indeed the Northwest. So, and I think the other aspect, of course, is the strategy recognises that in order to have a sustainable future by 2050, that we have to reduce our dependence on London. The risk is that the South East could, in effect, become a dormitory to commuting routes into London. Now, of course, that will still continue. But the opportunity to draw inward investment into the South East is sometimes stifled by the lack of transport infrastructure.
Okay, one more question then, I think, before we move on to the next session, comes from Chris Todd. And it says, a 2050 net zero target is no good if the carbon budget is blown before we get there. Will Transport for the South East set interim carbon reduction targets to ensure it gets transport on track to help deliver the carbon reduction required? How about having a go at that, Rupert?
Well, I'm pleased Chris has actually referred to carbon budget, because quite often people talk about emissions, but they don't look at it in a carbon budget sense. And the benefit of setting a carbon budget is that that if you can imagine drawing a graph, the area under your line, if you like, is the carbon budget that you've got until 2050, and if you drew the area if you imagined in your head drawing that arc, that carbon budget, there's a recognition that actually perhaps it is possible in the early years that your line, as you try to achieve that carbon budget, goes above the carbon budget. But the key is, as you go into the latter years, you've got to bring it in under. So you might see, relative to your overall carbon budget, an increase in emissions in the early years, but that in effect means that you've got to bring it in under the carbon budget by the time you get to 2050. So I think Chris is absolutely right to talk in those terms. The challenge for us is making sure that we get in under that carbon budget from a transport perspective by 2050.
Okay, and just one more actually, while we've got time. The Prime Minister said in July that Gear Change, the government cycling and walking vision, aims to kick the most radical changes to our cities since the arrival of mass motoring. What radical steps are you taking to prepare for this change?
I think that's again, we welcome that that emphasis on cycling, and clearly, the 16 local transport authorities are best placed to lead on cycling infrastructure within those areas. And the other thing I would just mention, of course, is that large swathes of the southeast are predominantly rural. So of course, those type of cycling approaches might work well, for example, in Southampton or Brighton or Portsmouth, but less so in Petworth or other rural communities, where of course there's leisure cycling, but utility cycling is slightly more challenging for a whole host of reasons. So I think we would welcome emphasis on that cycling infrastructure, and there is a potential role for Transport for a South East in relation to the National Cycle Network. But I think clearly local authorities know their areas best, and they are best placed to implement those types of schemes.
And just to close the session, Keith, any final thoughts?
Again, very good question. And I think what I said in my opening speech is that, there's a lot of people, because of COVID, have actually chosen to walk and cycle more. And we've got to do at a local authority level what we can to ensure that that is enabled. But at the end of the day, the whole carbon issue needs to start somewhere. And I think that the interventions that we will be looking at in years to come will have an effect whether we have electric vehicles or whether we have internal combustion engine vehicles. Some of these interventions will still need to happen. So I think we have the opportunity, working together, to identify how we can best achieve that. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for that. Just a reminder then, if you do want to ask a question, use the Q&A function. Some questions I think that are relevant for the next session as well, so I'll try and get through some of those. Do put your hand up. We would like to hear from you. Apparently we won't see you, but we will hear from you. So, if you're happy to have your voice on, then just put your hand up and I'll try and come to you, as many of you as possible, during the next session. As I mentioned earlier, one of the themes today is transport and land use planning, and we'll devote some time to that now for our next session and for our panel discussion. So for our next session, I'm delighted to say we're joined by the following. We've got Scott Wardrop, Scott is the Chief Executive of Eurovia, which is an organisation of more than 5,000 people delivering specialist highway services across the UK with more than 30 years experience in the construction industry. Welcome, Scott. Dr. Lee Woods is from Portsmouth University, an expert in travel behaviour with a keen interest in how new development can be sustainable. Dr. Sue Chadwick is a planning solicitor and strategic planning advisor with extensive experience in the public and private sector, and was recently appointed a research fellow at the Open Data Institute. She works for the international law firm Pinsent Masons LLP. And Jenny Raggett is project coordinator for Transport for New Homes. Jenny's career has been as a technical author working in computer research and development. For many years, she's been a campaigner for sustainable transport and better planning. Welcome to you all. Can I start by asking each of you in turn briefly why we need to improve our transport and planning and what we need to do to make it happen? Let's start then with Jenny.
Hello. Yeah, I'm from an organisation called Transport for New Homes, and we were specifically set up, we're funded by charities on the whole, to look at this very problem of development in the future and the provision of sustainable transport to support it. And most of our research has actually involved going to look at places. So that's been our forte. We've gone to visit places that have been built and spoken to the people who live there. So the reason why it's so important, I suppose, to think about planning and transport together is that if you don't, you do get some horrible results. And on our visits, what we've seen again and again are rather, well, not very attractive car-based developments where parking dominates the whole place, with very reduced gardens, very little greenery, and very little opportunity to use anything else other than your car. And what we found speaking to people who've moved into these places is that fully aware that you are more or less car bound. and they live around the car. And when it comes to the strategic road network, of course, they are there causing traffic jams. We've got some alternatives to doing this, and we do believe that the future needs to encourage those alternatives, not more of the same. So that's us in a nutshell.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for that. Let's cross over then to Dr. Lee Woods.
Hello. I think it's a really important part of the picture to have integrated land use and transport planning. But at the same time, I wouldn't want to overstate the potential of land use planning to bring about the very dramatic changes we really need in terms of people's travel behaviours. And I think that in order to be really successful, integrated land use and transport planning also needs to be integrated with other measures, specifically measures that tackle car use. So the relatively cheap cost of owning and using a car, if that's not tackled, it's unlikely that just by building areas that have got good access to public transport that people will necessarily use them. So the data suggests that people that are relatively well paid, own a car and have free parking at their place of employment. It doesn't seem to make a huge difference how close they live to good public transport. They're still very unlikely to use it. So I think it is really important that when we build new places, we do build places that are connected to public transport. But at the same time, we do need to tackle the relatively cheap cost of using a car if that's to be successful at the same time.
So you're effectively saying then that when we're looking at these big new developments, put them where the train lines are and things like that?
Yes, I agree. But at the same time, car use is actually really very cheap in the UK at the moment. I know some of us don't think that all the time when we're filling our car up with petrol. But in real terms, car ownership is actually really quite cheap, and people are relatively logical when they make their travel decisions. And if the options available to people are to use public transport or to buy and use a car, and the cost of buying and using a car is cheaper, they tend to use that.
Okay, well, thanks for that very much indeed. Sue.
Hi. Yes, I sort of have a double identity here because I'm a lawyer, but I'm also a researcher, particularly in plan tech and data ethics. So why we need transport? Well, it's for everything, isn't it? It's better for a human. It's better for humans if you can travel easily to work, if you can travel easily for social activities, but also if it allows you to have a healthier lifestyle. It's better for businesses if they have reliable, predictable travel methods. And it's better for the environment if we can reduce the car use by using more public transport or transport alternatives, reduce emissions. And we all know the arguments for a good transport system. The what is the harder thing. And I think if now more than ever, we need to think beyond the normal. So we've all grown up with this pattern that your travel is primarily something you do between home and work. That's no longer the case, but it's probably still something we'd want to do to connect with other people, to have a social life, to have a cultural life. There will be one eventually, we all hope. And travel itself is changing. Fuels are changing. Modes of transport are changing. Things like micro-mobility vehicles, even drones, these things that were without, just didn't exist when I was a kid are just possible now. But I think we also need to think about transport as more than just physical connection. Roads are how we see, roads and rail is how we primarily see transport. But if we see roads as something that can often deliver a lot of 5G pico cells, then that's enabling another kind of connectivity with a road. If you think about digital connectivity, it is obviously really important nowadays, and that can be built in with the travel systems. And then, of course, the other thing, which I'm surprised nobody's yet mentioned, we have an aging population. And that is something else that we need to think about. It's possible that that 5-kilometre journey might be the one that we're most concerned around in the future. How to get that 5 kilometres in between you at your home and your transport, or your home and the hospital, or the home and friends. And how you do that might be the key issue in the future rather than the longer journeys. And then finally, I think, and I would say this, if we're going to do transport in the future, it has to be ethically done. It has to be fully engaged. If we're going to use data, we have to use it in a trustworthy way. Otherwise, people won't use it at all and won't share it. And then we won't get the benefit of that rich source of information.
Okay, thank you for that. And Scott.
Thank you, Mike. Well, obviously, the whole pressure on the environment, and in particular COVID recently, has made us focus on significant changes to mobility, public, private transportation, and online shopping. This has accelerated digitalization. It's bringing fundamental changes to our high street. So for me, there's never been a better time to plan for the future that is greener and healthier, but also to find ways to be a catalyst to enhance social value in the communities. We need to find new economic models to fund our infrastructure, to fund new ways of working and new jobs. Just now, it could be quite easy to live in fear and just let things happen, but we need to accelerate to the future. Being an early adopter, increased electric vehicles, hydrogen propulsion. The point that Sue made about gaining, for me, 5G highways, but it doesn't just mean that you can use semi and fully autonomous mobility on those highways, which will reduce the killed and serious injured, which is unacceptable at the moment. But actually, having faster digital connectivity will actually stop some of those travel movements that we need to readdress going forward in the future. And finding those new jobs and roles, in associated business opportunities, new business opportunities, and repurposing public spaces because of the fundamental change in high streets. So for me, it's a multitude of things, but having that plan for the future, and that's what Transport for the South East is there. It's looking at a 20, 30-year vision, and what future do we want, but also what future is sustainable from an environment, but also from an economic point of view.
And what long-term impact do you think COVID might have with all of this?
Well, I think that question's been asked already, and I think the question that all of us want to know is when a vaccine comes, what side effects there may or may not be for certain parts of our society, and then how long a vaccine takes to get into our society. So I've seen the best case models of Q2 of next year and then a 1-year implementation. And then we've all seen other models that take it into 2022, 2023, and different scenarios. I think it's very difficult for us to see exactly what that means and how we don't go back to our old ways and how we keep evolving and changing. And that's coming back to my point, and a number of the panelists have made about planning for the future. In some ways, you have to plan beyond COVID. It's easy to have that fixated in our minds just now, but accelerating out of it and finding new ways to live and new ways to find an economy. We actually need to find a new model in the future and think beyond COVID.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. Some questions coming in now. There was one with the, I mentioned about the white paper, and will that create havoc for transport planning? Sue, do you want to have a go on that one? We knew the white paper was going to come up at some point, didn't we? So
I'm doing all of the responses for my firm at the moment on the digital side of things. So I'm absolutely sick to death of that white paper. It's a white paper. That's the first thing to remember. It's not an act. It's not a bill. It's not a proposed change to the NPPF. It is a white paper. It is an indication of the government's thinking. And some of these things may or may not happen. I personally think the digital thing will happen because I know a lot of people who are implementing it at the moment. I personally don't think anytime soon that the zoning approach is going to be adopted, except possibly in these new free ports, which is a proposal that is coming through. I think they will zone land within the free ports. I think they may zone land within other areas. I can't see a whole-scale zoning approach being adopted. But, you know, I'm probably going to, I know this is being recorded, so, you know, 2-3 years from now, somebody can come back and say, there you were, Sue, saying that. But the digital thing is going to happen. And I was slightly disappointed by the lack of specific questions on digital planning. And I was also disappointed that within the same month, the government brought out a consultation on its data strategy, the national data strategy, and an updated data ethics framework, and neither of them are integrated with the planning paper. And I was heartened to see that that isn't the approach that's being taken here, that the idea of innovation is hand in hand with transport and homes planning. So that's my kind of, there's one thing I do think will come out of it, one thing I don't. I'm happy to talk about the housing algorithm if anybody wants me to, but let's see where we are. I mean, I've been in planning long enough to have seen quite a few white papers come and go. And in some ways, the biggest changes have not been the ones we saw at the time, like the last minute amendment to the 1991 Act that said presumption in favour of the development plan. That was last minute amendment, and look at the difference it made. And we know none of us saw that coming at the time. So, you know, just be ready for anything, I think.
Lee, any view on that? And also, I think, you know, the whole digital thing is so important moving forward, isn't it? I mean, the white paper does talk about speeding up the decision making and digital for the future. So that's going to play a big part.
Yes, I think so. And perhaps if I could also perhaps go back to the previous question around COVID and the sort of responses to that in the future. I fear I could come across as being the sort of negative person on the panel here, but I do have some fears that if this becomes the new norm with the ways of work, that actually what we will see is even more of a drift towards suburban car-oriented living, where people are not necessarily tied to a particular place of work anymore. And I think there have been early indications in the housing market that people are kind of craving that sort of green space, rural kind of lifestyle even more during the lockdown. And I think that there is a danger that with us all learning how to telework and use digital technologies to undertake our work, that we could end up with more of a demand for urban sprawl, really.
Okay, and Jenny?
Yeah, I'd just like to say something about the digital planning. I think one of the big questions is what we'd use the digital planning for. And for example, if you go to somewhere like the Netherlands, they have very clear policies about where they're going to build. So they look first for somewhere that's adjacent to an existing town on the basis that then you can carefully get people to walk and cycle into the town and use it. Then there's a sort of, if we can't do that, well, a bit further out of town, but we'll put in the infrastructure to enable everything. And the last resort is out of town. And when I went to see the spatial planners in the Netherlands, I saw how they use geographical information systems to optioneer and look very carefully at land use and consequent infrastructure to get the policies that they had firmly established delivered. So I think with the white paper, what wasn't clear to me is how this digital technology mapping would be used. Would it be merely a presentational tool, or would it allow us that intelligence, that geography and that use of planning to actually think about where we were going to build and how? Because that aspect of things, to my mind, was completely lacking from the white paper, which incidentally, I think hardly mentioned transport at all, which was a bit of a surprise. So anyway, that's what we have discovered, you see, is that where you build is important. And if you do provide something like trams or light rail or some really good top-notch mass transit system, then people will use it. And for those who want to sort of see this, you know, the geographers in you, there's an absolutely brilliant map provided by Datashine at University College London. And you can see the travel to work patterns across the country for different modes. And you do notice that if you put in a tram or a light rail system or something like that, suddenly everybody does start to use it. But you can only put those in if you build along them and in the right place. And all this, I would have thought, would come to light with the proper use of geographical information systems. So it's great the government are talking about them, but is that the way they intend to use them? I wonder. So.
Okay, while I've still got you there, there's another question's just come in. To what extent do concepts such as the 15-minute city have a role to play in reducing transport demand across the region? And to what extent are these a feature of sustainable route to growth vision?
To what extent the 15-minute city? Well, I don't know too much about the specifics of the Southeast region in terms of that, but I do know that that does take me to something we've really noticed is important, and that's mixed use development. So if you want people to be within 15 minutes of lots of things that they want to do, you really do have to plan mixed use development. And although Poundbury is not somewhere that everybody approves of for various reasons, I have to say, if you live in Poundbury, nearly everything is within 15 minutes walk from where you live, and the place works because of that. And it's because it's been built around having things actually in town, not on a ring road. You don't have to drive to the supermarket because it's out of town. And, you know, if that's the sort of thing that we want in the future, mixed development is the order of the day. And it could include work hubs, which I think will be increasingly popular for those people who work at home, but also don't want to be stuck at home all the day. So you will be able to go to your work hub locally, use all the local facilities and feel part of the local scene. It's a kind of great future for people who don't want to be stuck in the car or in a crowded train going to work every day for hours.
Okay, another one then for the panel. Does the panel think we're now in a cycle of localism caused by digital transformation accelerated by COVID? If yes, then what do we need to do to support the urban centres? Lee?
So I think obviously during the lockdown, all of us should be very local in our travel. Yeah, I won't say anything about a certain advisor to the government there. But I think going forward, it remains to be seen whether or not this will continue. One of the problems that research has shown in people who stay very local for their employment travel is that we sometimes see these rebound effects where they tend to travel more for their leisure purposes instead. So I might sound a bit of a broken record here, but I would go back to the point that it's really, in my opinion, it's the cost of travel that needs to be tackled and the cost of travel by car. And if you are able to increase the cost of travel by car, you find that there's a drive towards more localism.
Okay, Scott?
Probably just coming in on a fundamental point. It's very easy to make a reaction because of how we're living right this minute. I think there's a burning need to know what kind of world, what kind of economy and what kind of plan we have for 5, 10, 15 years. There's been comments already about planning for net zero earlier than 2050. And what kind of world, what kind of economy can we have in our country for that period between now and say 2040? And once you see what kind of economy and what kind of jobs, you can plan to put the planning in the right position for what mobility you do and don't have, what type of property, what type of connections that you need. And it would be unfair. You listen to the media at the moment, and it's a feeding frenzy on the government. But we are needing a fundamental look at what, beyond COVID, what kind of world are we going to have? And how do we get to that position? How do we get to that place? And yes, transport and planning is one part, but what kind of jobs and how are we going to have an economy in our country, which will be fundamentally different, irrespective of your politics? And actually having that longer term view allows you to answer some of the questions that are being thrown up today. And in some ways, we need to take the politics out of it at the moment and look at what kind of economy and what kind of country that we try to build, that then we can then plan for that future. And I know it's quite a fundamental point. It's something in Transport for the South East, we're trying to look 30, 40 years ahead, because you have to plan that far in advance. But you need to think, well, what kind of economy, what kind of jobs, what kind of localism and transportation would you have to sustain that? And that more wider vision that encompasses so many points, and I know there's so many question marks, but some of the points that are being made, you need to look at where are you going, and then you can make the right decisions on the way. Our country is held back by short-termism. We have annual budgets, we have 4-year cycles, and we have 5-year cycles. But the point we're making is, where is our country going to be in 20, 30 years, and what steps do you take to get to that point? And actually taking some of the politics out of it and some of the short-termism out of it would actually help us all get to that, because all of us are needing to see a vision just now.
Okay. I would.
Yeah.
Yeah, can I just say that I really agree about taking the politics out of it if we can, and also that I think it's so important to agree outcomes, for everybody to agree, because only then can you make progress. And I just was reminded about when I went to see Eindhoven, which reinvented itself completely transport-wise by blocking up to vehicles, I think 20 out of 23 arterial roads going in. And I said, well, how did you get that past local people? That just sounds extraordinary. Well, you know, we're going to put cycle routes, linear parks in, rapid transit, all sorts of things. And we expect people to come in using those modes. And I just kept saying, I don't think in England we would get away with that. And they said, well, here, what happened was that people of all political persuasions finally realised we needed to change. And so from top down, there was a united opinion that we must change the way we do things. And from then on, it was much easier to go forward. And, you know, I think there are things still that I see which amaze me in this time and age. Like when I look at planning applications, to my amazement, most of the transport aspects are about modelling the road network into the future, as though car travel will just grow and grow and grow. And we're going to have to unblock junctions, you know, for decades to come. And, you know, this diverts us from the kind of a really all getting behind a vision for something different. So I just thoroughly agree. I think it's so important. Otherwise, we're still fighting each other on things which really are from a past era.
Okay, a question come in. Dr. Woods has summed up the problem. It takes a lot of commitment to spend more and have the inconvenience of public transport. What can we do to encourage local smart card travel schemes? How can they be funded? Can you pressurise government to alter the financial balance? as they mentioned you, Lee, how about you?
Well, I'm not sure how much influence I personally have on government to redress the balance. But yeah, if it were up to me, yeah, we certainly would have a redress of the balance. I mean, there are some great initiatives that are taking place with smart ticketing, mobility as a service providers. So currently at the University of Portsmouth and University of Southampton with the Solent region, we're going to start piloting a large mobility as a service pilot in the region, and we hope that that will reduce some of the non-monetary costs associated with public transport, walking and cycling. Yeah, it's a really difficult one though, and it's very easy, I suppose, for me to say from an academic perspective that we need to increase the cost of driving, and therefore people will travel more sustainably and want to live in more sustainable areas. But obviously that is a really difficult political decision for people to make.
That was another question as well, talking about how much is raised, I think, in taxes for motoring, and saying, should we be diverting some of that money to public transport?
Indeed, and I think somebody posted in the chat as well that the actual costs to society of car use are not borne wholly by car drivers. So there is a very strong argument that taxes ought to increase on car use to cover the wider damage that car drivers, like myself, I should admit, burden the rest of society, and that money could be used to subsidise public transport, walking and cycling more.
Sue, quick view on that one?
Yeah, I'm Londoner, so I'm using a smart card, the Oyster, all the time. And what makes it usable is that it's easy. I trust it. You know, I know that they de-anonymize the data, so they collect the data that where I am, but it isn't me, it's just a data point. It's safe. I always feel safe traveling on the transport. And it's fair in the sense that there are discounts and subsidies for younger and older people. However, obviously, the last 6 months, the Oyster card wasn't quite the Oyster card that it used to be, because we weren't supposed to use the tube, and now I don't. And if somebody had said 6 months ago, you'll be happy walking 5 miles into work, I would have told them they were idiots. But I really enjoy it now. And this is where the pandemic has really changed the way I travel to work. Discovered all sorts of podcasts and given up my high heels, which again, never thought I would do in a million years. But the point is, change is possible. I don't want to be too Pollyanna-ish, but it is quite possible to make people change. And it's a combination of all those things, including the subsidies, the individual change and the structural change.
And Jenny, any final thoughts on that one?
I would like to say, in our recent research, we looked at garden villages and towns. What we found was that there was a massive appetite among consultants working for local authorities and land promoters, and among the people we spoke to, for really good public transport. And but it was perceived to be something that was so difficult it had to be pushed into the long grass. And Graiseley Garden Village, which is south of Reading, for example, really would like a mass transit link into Reading. It's obviously, they can see the importance of it. These are the consultants whose report we've read, but it's something which somehow is always thought to be too difficult. We've come across suggestions for mass transit for, in fact, Southampton, Hertfordshire are trying to do a tram. Always, though, there are barriers, and part of it appears to be that the modelling software that's still used for transport still doesn't take into account the value that these things would give to society and to future lifestyles. So, it's easier to enlarge a motorway junction or put in a bypass than it is to deliver the sort of top quality public transport that we really need for growing out areas. And I just think that is another problem that needs to be looked at.
Okay, thanks very much. I think Keith Glazier would like to make some comments. Keith, can we bring you in?
Sorry, yeah, it was on the previous one really, and it was about the politics, and I guess I think it's just another plus for subnational transport boards and transport for the South East specifically. We cover, and I'm not talking about the local politics, I'm talking about politics across the whole of the South East. With a small p, we actually work as a partnership across all of those political divides. So therefore, I understand the point about planning authorities changing political persuasion and I guess governments at the other end, but actually having that middle ground where we can hold a voice that's based on evidence and coming together, I think is a really good start. I'll stop there because I know the Baroness is here to join us, so thank you.
Okay, we've just got a couple of minutes. One last one then. And that would say, could each speaker say if they think the government's £27 billion road programme is logical, set against the important need to reduce carbon emissions? Let's have a quick 30 seconds in summary before we go to the Transport Minister. Starting with Jenny.
Well, no, I have to say I don't think it's logical in this day and age, and at a time when people are using commuting less. And I would recommend instead a new strategy which is building in such a way and putting in public transport in such a way that people use the strategic route system less, leaving it up to those who want to use it for long distance journeys. So get local traffic off the roads and leave it less encumbered with traffic for the long distance traveller. There we go.
Sue.
Okay, I'm not going to be political. Obviously, there are some merits in what is proposed, but I agree with Jenny. We are at a crisis point, but crisis doesn't necessarily mean a bad thing. The word comes from crossroads. That's what it originally meant. It's a crossroads. And we are at a crossroads. We simply don't know which road to take out of this current situation or which ones will be possible. Right now, I think the time is to take a step back and see what the future holds before we commit to too much spending in any particular area.
Lee?
Yeah, I could give an answer in far less than I don't think it's a particularly good idea. And although there are benefits to building roads, largely economic benefits, the cost benefit analysis of many of these projects doesn't actually appear to be that favourable compared to investing that money in local public transport, walking and cycling facilities. And finally, Scott.
I suppose I have to declare a slight allegiance because I'm a maintainer and a constructor of roads. I think there's a couple of things I would say. In an economic position that our country's in, you have to look at economic stimulus, and the fastest way to put stimulus into an economy is into infrastructure. For every £1 you invest, you put £3 back in the economy. Within 6 to 12 months, it's one of the fastest stimulus mechanisms a government can use, whether it's Labour or Conservative. And if you look through history, investing in infrastructure is the fastest way to stimulate an economy. That said, you have to use it wisely, and you have to use it looking to the future. And I am aware of some of the infrastructure that we're involved with is very much addressing cycling and walking. In fact, Department for Transport has actually reprioritised its whole mechanism. So despite what some people see it's just pure road building, actually that is either enhancing environmental, putting in certain infrastructure for electric vehicle charging, repurposing highways, repurposing areas that used to be the high street into different public space. So I think it's easy to say, oh, 27 billion is just road building. I think you actually have to look at how it's being spent, where it's being spent. And I know from a local authority point of view, it's being spent very wisely with their communities and with local politicians. But the point of looking beyond 1 to 4 years was my point earlier. We do need to look further into the future.
Okay, well, I think we're just about out of time for the session, but thank you all for joining us. Lots of food for thought there. So thank you again, one and all. Okay, so let's move on then, and our final session, which is our keynote address. I'm delighted that the Transport Minister, Baroness Vere, has taken time out of her busy schedule to join us live. Her portfolio, of course, includes roads, buses and light rail. So now it's over to Baroness Vere.
Thanks very much, Mike, and good morning, everybody. And can I just say, I agree with Scott. I thought that was quite an interesting conversation there, because I do have, I have the best portfolio in transport, really, don't I? Because I cover roads, I cover buses, I cover light rail. I also cover devolution, which is why I'm speaking to you today, because devolution is obviously quite a significant part of how we deal with transport and our ability to get funding out to the communities that need it. A key example, for example, is I'm finally, really pleased that we finally got Portsmouth over the line recently in order to give them some money from the Transforming Cities Fund. But I cannot let the comment about the road building programme, as it was called, go unanswered, because I think that the key thing we'd all recognise about transport is it does have to be a long-term game. You cannot stop. It doesn't work like that. You destroy your supply chain. You stop investment, economic investment on the back of the transport that you're going to be putting in, because at the end of the day, transport is an enabler. That's all it really does. It helps other people either get to work, or get to their home, and it supports all of those things. So the £27 billion, obviously most of that goes on our strategic road network, which is absolutely critical for our freight. And so unless somebody else is going to come up with a good idea for getting our goods from A to B, then I'm afraid we do have to do that. And then I think the other thing to remember, the £27 billion that is oft bandied around, a huge amount, I can't remember the precise proportion, a huge amount of that is actually on maintenance. It's making sure that the roads we already have continue to serve the people that travel on them. And I would also say that, I look after buses, and buses go on roads. And every single project that we put into the strategic road network, it always thinks about, how do buses use it? Does it need a bus priority system? How do cyclists and walkers navigate that new particular junction, that new particular road? And how can we make it as sustainable as possible, and whether it fits into the environment? All of those things are critical. That's why it takes so long to build roads. So I could sort of obviously blither on about this forever, but I just did want to sort of add my tuppence to the last question that came through on that last contribution. So very good. But thanks very much for inviting me to speak here today. And I'd just like to thank Keith and Rupert and everyone who works and contributes to the work of Transport for the South East. I have been really blown away by the work that has been done so far. It is of an outstanding quality, and it's exactly the sort of thing that we as government look to in terms of getting local accountability, local buy-in, local ideas, making sure that the transport that we provide serves your community, which I think is at the heart of it. And I was listening to the conversation, people saying you've got to take the politics out. You can't take the politics out, because politics exists to serve the people. It's rather like when I used to be in education, people used to say to me, take the politics out of education. But how? Because you're serving the people. That's what politics is all about, is you're doing what the people would like you to do. So I think where we are at the moment is we're looking at transport for the South East. It's at a hugely important area, second biggest contributor to our economy. And also, looking through your transport strategy, what really, really struck me was how large an area it is and how diverse it is in terms of going from areas of relatively low income to very, very wealthy areas with very, very high economic output. But of course, the COVID-19 pandemic has, I hope, temporarily changed so much about our lives. But I agree with an earlier contributor who said that it does offer quite a lot of opportunity. Certainly, we've all got used to connecting in a different way, and that will probably impact on our long-term ambitions for transport. And from a bus perspective, when I finish today, I will be going back to the bus strategy, looking at what does our long-term ambition for buses look like, and how does that change, and are people's journeys going to be different? So things will change as a result of the pandemic, but I think none of us can be certain the extent to which they will change. And so we really have to be somewhat flexible in the systems that we're putting in now about how we take that forward. And it has really tested our resilience as a nation. And I really want to thank you all for what you do and for, the work that you continue to do in your local communities. We've had, a huge amount of support from local authorities. And I know that unfortunately that's going to continue. I think as we watch the news every day, we can see that we're certainly not out of the woods. But just thinking about subnational transport bodies in particular, and I think this goes back to the comment about, getting people to agree. And that's what we look to subnational transport bodies to do. And Transport for the South East, I've already mentioned, I think is a really good example of that. Because the Department for Transport, we're sitting in the centre, we cannot do it on our own. We do not know all of the priorities all across the country. So we look to subnational transport bodies for the sort of leadership and strategic oversight on transport projects that we can then put into the system, whether that be a mass transit system. And again, we spend a lot of time looking at mass transit systems. Some of them work and some of them don't. And often they simply don't stack up because they can be quite expensive. However, I would also say that actually new developments of mass transit systems are making them cheaper. And so in the olden days, I'm sure you'll all remember, at one side you would have heavy rail, then you'd have light rail, and then over here you'd have bus. But actually what's happening is there's this grey area now in the middle where we have sort of guided bus rails, where essentially you're looking at something which is a tram but on rubber wheels. So it looks a bit like a bus, and these things are much cheaper. So we are looking very actively and looking for ideas into how we can create travel corridors, put on the sort of mass transit systems that are now coming to the fore to make sure that we encourage people out of their vehicles, because their own cars, because there are alternatives. So those are the sorts of things that we're looking at, and we very much value leadership and strategic oversight. And then the second thing goes back to the small p politics of this. It is a collective regional voice which can come to government and say, this is what we really need, and this is the outcome over the next 20, 30, 40 years that we will see, provided you support us in these developments. And last year, the STBs were very helpful in enabling us to prioritise our investment in the major road network. Again, you might say, oh goodness, this is more investment in roads. I take issue that is a bad thing. I don't think private cars are going anywhere anytime soon. What we do have to make sure that we do is encourage the take-up of electric vehicles. But some of the projects that are coming through from the STBs were real local pinch points, and they cause huge congestion. And congestion is a problem for buses. It is a problem for all people who use roads. It is a problem for air quality. So the consequences of having a poor road design that needs work are huge. And so that's why the STBs were really good in helping us to prioritise, and we're really pleased that we've been able to take lots of those projects forward, and we continue to do so as the local authorities develop their plans and bring them to us. One of the things I think in transport that we often hear from people is, oh, it just takes so long. And yes, it does. It can take a long time. But one of the reasons why it takes a long time is because of our concerns about the impact of schemes. And we really do have to think very carefully about the long-term environmental impact on schemes, whether or not the right sort of things are being supported. But so that we can look at the period before construction, which quite frankly is the bit that seems to take longer than it should. The government set up an acceleration unit to look at all of the elements of planning, environmental work. Can we speed up things? How do we get the consultation as effective but as quick as possible? All of these things, if we could just reduce a little bit without changing anything about the efficiency and the usefulness of the work, can we get projects moving forward more quickly? Because I think that would be hugely beneficial to local people. And this applies to all projects, not just road projects. So our acceleration unit is looking into that, and I hope that we will be able to bring forward some thoughts soon. But as I've said to Keith previously, any thoughts that you have from your side about, oh, if you were to change this, we'd knock a week off. I'd take a week. I'd happily take a week. A whole bunch of weeks will make us be able to deliver projects more quickly. But we are investing, very significantly in the southeast of England. Obviously 2.2 billion on major roads, 1.7 billion on 110 different transport schemes. And then, as I mentioned earlier, so 110 million to Southampton and Portsmouth. Yay, well done, Portsmouth, finally getting there, to really provide some really good intra-city work. And I'm fairly confident that, we will be focusing more on improving intra-city transport as we go forward. We've had £300 million which has gone to Network Rail to improve their infrastructure, because, of course, for many people in the South East, commuting can be part of their daily lives. And we've invested, one of my jobs, most important jobs recently has been propping up the bus services. I'm currently running every single bus service in the country. We are supporting it with hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds, because we recognise how important bus services are. If you look at the demographics of who use buses, it is often people who don't have access to a car. We cannot afford for those services to disappear. And so we are absolutely making sure that they are supported, as is light rail. We've also provided, obviously, lifeline funding for the Isle of Wight ferry. Again, really, really important. And there was a lot of discussion in the last session about cycling and walking, and the government has said has committed £2 billion to that. And what's been quite interesting is obviously the first amounts of money, the first tranche has gone out, second tranche will go out very, very soon. And it's been quite interesting looking at how those have landed. There have been good projects that have landed really well with their local communities, and not so good projects, which have actually caused quite a bit of local disquiet. So I think it'll be beholden upon all of us in central government and in local government is to get projects developed as much as possible, get buy-in from local communities, so that when they're put in place, everybody goes, oh yeah, I knew that was coming. And yes, I accept I cannot now drive down that road, but don't worry, because I can go this way. But also encouraging the modal shift as well will be really, really important. So I do think that we have a very sort of ambitious vision of where we think transport is going to go in this government. And I think that our ambition is matched by the scale of the ambition in the Transport for the South East strategy. Thank you so much for all the work that has gone into it. And I think that, that this is just the start. This is just the start of the relationship that we will have going forward, to focus on the things that are as important for you as they are to us. And that is obviously economic growth, making sure that we keep decarbonisation top of mind, digital connectivity, modal shift, active travel, levelling up across the country, making sure that our less well-off communities get the investment that they need. So I look forward to working for the Transport for the South East. It's been really enjoyable so far. I would like to say, on transport decarbonisation, we've got our transport decarbonisation plan coming out later on this year. And I actually looked through the papers yesterday, and I was really pleased with the scale of the ambition. And I hope that you will be too, and that you will look at that and see many of the things that you put in your strategy coming through. And where there's not, perhaps we need to go back and we need to talk about why your ambition is not the same as our ambition. So we've got a lot of work to do. I love my job. I'm sure you love your job. And I think that there's a huge amount that we can do going forward. So finally, once again, thank you to you for all of your thoughts, your ideas, and the work that you're doing. There's much more to be done. And I'm very, very grateful to Keith in particular for his leadership.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Good to hear about the acceleration unit and the plans there, and also the money to keep the buses going, because outside of London, some of those routes really do run on an ice age. So that money is really well spent, certainly in our part of the world. So thank you for that. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Great. Okay, well, that actually brings us just about to the end of today, really. It has been different. These things are always different when you're not face to face, but I think, you do your best with the technology that we have. And I think it was important that today did go ahead. Just like to say very much thank you to Keith and Rupert and the panel. Seen some very nice comments on the Q&A, asking for Transport for the South East to take on board some of the panelists' comments. Great panel was another one. So thank you all very much indeed for that, and hope to see you next year. But for now, from me, it's goodbye.